Good afternoon, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Exodus, chapter 10. And just for way of review, I would like to point you to the last plague that was coming down upon the people of Egypt, and it was in the form of hail. We can see in chapter 9, towards the end of chapter 9, when the hail came down and destroyed the harvest, we are told that it was the flax and the barley that was struck, but the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they were late crops. By way of review, I just want to point out that this is a period of time between late January to early March. So we have January, February, March, and April. What we have right now is a period somewhere between March and April. We have Nisan. And then at this point in time, we would have the period of Adar, which is late January to possibly early March. And so the flax and barley are generally in this period of time. The wheat and spelt were generally in this period of time. And so what we have now is we are now in this period after the hailstorm struck, but before the wheat and spelt harvest. Now, with this, we will continue with chapter 10. Remember, in chapter 12, we are talking about the first 15 days of Nisan. And so, whatever is going to happen from chapter 10 to chapter 12, there are going to be three plagues, and it will happen between the late period of Adar till the 15th of Nisan. Now in chapter 10, we have the words, and then Jehovah said to Moses. Now this phrase here is going to be very particular. It says, go into Pharaoh, go and see Pharaoh, come to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants. And the purpose is that I may show these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and the son's son, the mighty things that I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that Ani Jehovah. So let's break this down a little bit. It says, come to Pharaoh, see him in the palace. And this is the particular phrase I want to highlight to you. For I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants. Now, this word, I have hardened, is slightly different. I have caused his heart to be heavy. And so we call it hardened. This idea here is a causative verb, and God is not zapping his heart nor the hearts of his servants. This is how God has used the miracles, particularly in the seventh miracle, which is the miracle of the hail. And the Pharaoh had decided that he admits that he has sinned. And the idea here is really to lead him down the path to know that he is not any bigger than himself. He cannot be bigger than Jehovah. He is not even bigger than Moses. And so what caused his heart to be heavy is that God used the miracles to taunt him, to mock him, to make him realize that he is inferior to Moses, particularly as well as inferior to Jehovah. And as they realize that they cannot fight against Jehovah, they become more stubborn. So the word harden is stubborn. It is a choice to reject the authority of Jehovah. As long as they feel that they are more powerful, they think that they are the king of the land, they do not want to listen to Jehovah. But the miracles, one by one, is forcing the Pharaoh as well as the servants to realize that God is way, way too powerful for them. At the same time, we also note that God says, I want to show these signs of mine. And whenever you read signs, you need to be able to realize these are visible. Signs are always visible. And so everybody can tell. And God says, these are my signs, that when they see these happenings, it is not human, it is supernatural. It is from Jehovah God. That before him literally means for him to see, right? In verse 1, that they can actually see these signs, that you may tell in the hearing of your son, meaning you, the Israelites, will tell your son and your son's son, which is your grandson. So this whole idea is to pass it down by oral tradition to your son, and your son will pass it down by oral tradition to your son's son. The mighty things that I have done in Egypt are the signs which I have done among them. So notice this is an A and this is a B, which means that my signs is the mighty things that I have done in Egypt. The whole purpose of God showing the signs is that you may know. Now, this word know, yada, comes from experience. And so they could see the mighty things that God has done. Just about a chapter ago, it would be the hailstones that came to break apart the harvest of the flax and barley, so that all of them who are there, the Israelites, they now can experience, they understand, and this becomes knowledge. And that's how they know. Know what? Ani Jehovah. I am Jehovah, the true and living God. And so we find in verse 3, and then after God spoke to him, and then Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh and said to him, went into the palace, spoke to Pharaoh. Now understand this, Pharaoh is the king of the land. And by going in, they are confronting with the king of the land. And they are telling him these words. Thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews. So said Jehovah, the Elohim of the Hebrews. And God is asking a question. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? The idea of humble yourself is to become lower. And so with this, I think we can safely be able to map out this: harden to humble. These are important words to link up. For I have hardened to make you stubborn, because you refuse to humble and make yourself lower than God, lower than Moses. And so, how long will you refuse? Will you object to become less than me? As long as you see the powers of God, the mighty things that God has done, the signs that God has done, and inside you, you know that you cannot fight God, and yet you refuse God. And so that whole aspect is hardening. That he refused to be humble, to become lower. So God tells him, let my people go. The idea of let my people go is to send my people away. Please remember this. Send my people away, that they may serve me, or else if you refuse, which means what? This is a choice. If you refuse to let my people go, or you refuse to send them away, look, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. Now, this whole idea of locusts to your territory in verse 4 is the name Arbe. Arbe. Just for your knowledge, this is a word for a particular type of locust. Now, locust is not commonplace in Egypt. They normally come when there is no food to eat, when the land is dry. But Egypt is irrigated by the Nile River. Forever it's like a garden. And so having locusts in your territory is a very unusual thing. And so God says in verse 5, and they will cover the face of the land. And this word is land, not just earth. Think of it that it's the land of Egypt, not earth as in the third rock from the sun, so that no one will be able to see the land. And they shall eat the residue of what is left. That would be wheat, right? Wheat, which remains to you from the hail, and they shall eat every tree which grows up for you of the field. Now, understand this. Flax and barley had been destroyed in the previous plague. Now, the balance of the harvest as it's coming to bear, they will also be destroyed, and this time by the locusts. And to teach them, who are you going to say that you are greater than when you have nothing to eat? The locusts shall fill your houses, the houses of your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen since the day that they were on the land to this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Now, this is a very interesting expression. Here, the locust is not normal. And this is once and for all the only time that it's going to be so severe that they don't expect locusts, and it comes in such a great number that's going to cover everything. And then suddenly, Moses turned and went out from Pharaoh. Moses walked away from Pharaoh, which is very unusual. Verse 7. And then Pharaoh's servants said to him, remember, this is the servants speaking to Pharaoh. They are now talking among themselves after Moses have walked out. And they asked, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed? Now, this idea in verse 7 is the servants conceding. The servants is conceding to tell Pharaoh, look, just let them go. Let them serve the Lord their God, Jehovah their God. We cannot fight them because they cannot reproduce all the miracles that is happening. And so, if you continue this, do you not yet know that Israel is destroyed? There is going to be no food to eat if this thing happens. We have lost the flax and the barley. And if you allow this to happen, then you will lose all the crops. Verse 8. And then Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh, which means what's happening here is you have the palace. Pharaoh is here. And then we have Moses and Aaron originally in here. And then they went out. Now they are brought back in to see Pharaoh. That's how this thing works. And he said to them, Pharaoh said to Moses and Aaron, go. The idea is to walk, serve Jehovah your God. Who are the ones that are going? And then Moses said, we will go with our young and with our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds. We will go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. Now, this idea of feast is actually a holy day. Now, the idea of a holy day gives us the idea of dancing around, celebrating, right? This feast is a hug. It's celebratory. And so you see the pairs, young and old, sons and daughters, flocks and herds. This is how the Hebrew works. Very oriental, two-word type of expressions. And so Moses literally is saying, when you think of it this way, young and old, sons and daughters, flocks and herds, literally means everything must go. And we are going out to have a celebration to the Lord. It is nevertheless a holy day. And then in verse 10, it says to them, the Lord had better be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Beware, evil is ahead of you. Actually, evil is not in the head of you. Evil is in front. I think this would be a better word, in front of you. Now, what does this mean is that this expression is a warning. It's a warning from Pharaoh to them that your God had better be with you when I let you go and your little ones go. Beware that evil, and what is evil? Evil is in the eyes of the beholder. This would be evil in the eyes of the Israelites. The evil is in front of you. And what did Pharaoh meant is that he's saying that, watch out, I am going to bring evil upon you when you're not careful. Verse 11. Not so. Go now. Not so means I don't agree with what Moses is saying. This is what Moses said. And Pharaoh is saying, no, I cannot agree. You who are men, go serve the Lord, for that is what you desire. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. So Pharaoh was willing to let the men go, but not the young, not the sons, and not the daughters. Verse 12. And then the Lord said to Moses, because Pharaoh, so far, though he said, I let you go, but it's only your men, that wasn't the condition. Basically, if you know and remember what Moses said, Moses wants to bring everybody out. And so God said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land. This idea of every herb, it means every green vegetation. All that the hail had left. The hail did not destroy everything. There was still harvest to be made, particularly the wheat. And so the picture that we are given is that Moses lifts up his hand to the land of Egypt. And as he lifts up his hand, he is signaling and directing the traffic of the locusts. And then, verse 13, and then Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt. And so there is a rod that Moses has. And the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. So this is something we need to watch. This is the land of Egypt. And these are the rivers of Egypt. And so east wind basically comes from this side. This is the east wind on all the land. And they bring the locusts in because locusts generally is at the dried areas. And so God is literally blowing them to Egypt. They're not actually flying to Egypt because Egypt is not a dried land. And so God brought the east wind on which the locusts are coming. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. So we now know that the east wind is the vehicle of which the locusts came. The locust is not coming by themselves. And then the locusts went up all over the land of Egypt and rested on all the territory of Egypt, which also seems to suggest a form of a miracle that they are not at Goshen, only at the Egyptian territory. And they were severe. They were mighty, means they ate a lot. Previously, there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there be after them. This is a one-time event that these locusts that came, the arbe, right? The arbe that came was a one-time event and it would not have happened thereafter. And then they covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened. So think of it this way. The idea of darken in verse 15 is to be made dark. And this word darken is because of the locusts. So understand, darkness is not a particular description of a state. No, when you turn off the light, it is dark. In the Hebrew Oriental concept, darkness is always caused by something. Now, in this particular case, in verse 15, the darkness is caused by locusts, the arbe. There were so many of them that the whole land was black. And then they ate every green vegetation of the land, all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. The hail did not destroy the fruits as well. So there remained nothing green on the trees, on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. Whatever remained from the harvest for the wheat is no longer there. Verse 16. And then, as the locusts came, it was very scary. Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste. The idea of in haste is very anxious. So you can think of it very anxious, in a hurry. You can think of it that it was caused by the locusts and they don't know what to do with it, and there is nothing left to eat. And so it was a very urgent call for Moses and Aaron, and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now, this is the second time that he is saying this. Sinned is made a mistake. I made a mistake against Jehovah, your God, and against you. I have sinned against Jehovah and against you. And the Pharaoh says, now therefore, please forgive my sin, and only this once. The idea here is to lift. Forgiveness is not a normal Hebrew word. The idea of forgive is to lift my sins. For this, only one, and entreat the Lord. Now, this is important. And entreat the Lord your God. Entreat means cause to supplicate, cause to intercede. So this is the word. Cause to intercede. Pray for me and ask on my behalf that he may take away from me this death only. Now understand that this word, this death, is not literally death, but it is this destruction. The locust seems to bring death. Why? Because there's darkness and there's nothing more to eat. And with this request, we find Moses in verse 18, and then he went out from Pharaoh and he interceded to God on behalf of the Pharaoh. And the Lord turned a very strong west wind. Now, I need to bring your attention to this. It's a west wind. So we look at Egypt again. And Egypt has the Nile River. Earlier on, we saw that the locust was brought by an east wind. Now, God is going to use the west wind. So this is the west wind. And the west wind is going to blow the locusts back to where they came from, the dry part, the desert part of the land, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Sea of Reeds. Now, apparently, all these locusts were sent into this area here, which is the Red Sea. And so we are told that the locusts are no more. There remain not one locust in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children go. So think with me this word harden. The idea of harden here in verse 20 is to make strong. Earlier was caused to be heavy. This would be make strong, make resolute. What this means really is that Pharaoh's decisions is now firmer. No, I will not let them go. That is basically it. Now, how did that happen? Because now, after the trouble is gone, Pharaoh thinks he can get away with it yet again. Now, so notice God knows Pharaoh's style of operation, that as the miracle and the plague came and he couldn't deal with it, he asked for his forgiveness. And then after that, he forgets that God had withheld the power of his hand over all of Egypt. And then he realized he can become stubborn again. And that's the basic idea here. Harden is to become resolute, to decide not to give in. Verse 21. And then, after they realize that Pharaoh is not letting anyone go, then Jehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may be felt. Now, let me explain this. First, there is the holding up of the hand, and obviously his staff is there. And as he holds out his hand toward the sky, that there may be darkness. So, this idea of darkness is a thing. And this would very much be like a fog over the land of Egypt, a fog which may be felt. So, you can actually touch and feel, right? You cannot touch and feel a state of darkness. When you turn off the light right now, you can't feel darkness. But this is darkness that you can feel. It would mean that there will be clouds coming in. And these are clouds that is more like mist or fog, thick fog that you can't see through. And hence, that's darkness. That is how the Bible describes darkness. It is not a state, it is like clouds on the ground. It is so thick you can't see through. And so Moses stretched out his hand toward the skies, and there was thick darkness. Notice, thick darkness. This is a very particular word, and we'll get back to this. There was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. This idea of thick darkness is choshek afela. So choshek afela. Now, what does this mean? Choshek afela means it was a very serious darkness. And this would be very thick clouds. Or if you like, fog, since it's nearer the ground. Just like in the sea, when the fog is so thick you can't see where you're going, this was a fog on the land. It was so thick they can't see anything, and so they call it darkness. They did not see one another nor anyone rise from his place for 3 days. The fog was staying on the land for 3 days. You can't see anything. The sun can't shine through. Very much similar to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Now, this idea of have light, this is or. let there be light, that he can see brightness. And so there is brightness in the dwellings of the children of Israel, so in Goshen, but in the rest of the land, this thick fog, right? The very thick clouds or fog covered the entire land for 3 days. That's a long time for people not to be able to see anyone because the fog was so thick. Verse 24. And then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, you see, each time he is defeated, he will call Moses. Go, serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herd be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you. And so this was a condition. Let your flocks and your herds be kept back. But Moses had said that we will bring the young and the old, my sons and the daughters, the flocks and the herds. Now, the flocks and the herds all belong to the Israelites, and they are the Israelites' wealth, so to speak, and they need it for offering as well. But when they go without their flocks and herds, it means that Pharaoh expects them to come back. You see, earlier on, Pharaoh said you can't let your young ones go because if the adults go out, the adults will come back. And so, no, that cannot be. Now, Pharaoh says, fine, I'll let your young ones go, but you keep your flocks and herd because I know that you can't go out into the wilderness with nothing. So you will come back. But Moses said, Moses is asking, you must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, animals to slaughter that we may slaughter to the Lord our God. That is why our livestock shall also go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. Every animal, for we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God. And even we do not know with what we must serve the Lord our God until we arrive there. So Moses is saying, we need all the livestock, the flocks and the herds to come together for the purpose of sacrifices. And since we don't know what we are going to sacrifice, we only know when we get there. We want all the options with us. Verse 27. And then, this is and then, Jehovah strengthened the heart of Pharaoh. This is strengthened. Strengthen means make more stubborn. And so through this, he refused to acknowledge God. He refused to say that God is greater. And so through this, he made it a point to reject the position of God over him. And he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, verse 28, and then Pharaoh said to him, watch these words. Get away from me. So it says, walk away from me. Take heed. Be careful. You will not see my face anymore. For in the day that you see my face, you shall die. So understand that you shall see my face no more is a threat. That Pharaoh says, this is the end. I am not going to see you. Meaning, you will not see my face. Moses and Aaron will never be accepted to come back to Pharaoh. And look at what Moses said. And then Moses said, you have spoken well. Meaning, you have said correctly. You have said honestly, correctly. You have said rightly. I will never see your face again. And that is true because there's only one more plague that's going to come upon, which is the death of the firstborn. born. And in that plague, as we get there, you find that Pharaoh went to look for Moses instead. He did not summon for Moses and Aaron. He went looking for them. And so take heed to yourself that you will see my face no more means that you won't come to see me, but the Pharaoh will go to look for Moses. And so Moses said, I will never see your face again. And that is true because God has come to a point where he will play the last card. And in that last card, it will be the plague that will break the camel's back, so to speak. It will be the plague that even Pharaoh cannot say no to God. And so God has been building all this up so that the children of Israel will have something to tell their sons and their sons' sons that God has shown his mighty hand in Egypt. That Pharaoh will learn of the greatness of the God of the Hebrews. And all of these are signs, very visible, that Pharaoh and the servants and all the Egyptians and the Israelites could actually see, but each of them will be talking slightly differently, I must admit, that the Israelites have to keep telling the story so that they will never ever forget how God redeemed them out of Egypt. And so the strengthening or the making Pharaoh's heart or decision more stubborn is that Pharaoh would be even less inclined to let them go, and he would continue to say no. In fact, in this case, the Pharaoh says, get lost. I don't want to see you anymore because the next time I see you, I will kill you. That would be the threat in more layman's terms. And Moses said, that's correct. I will not see you again. Because the next time the next plague happens, it is so intense and grievous that the Pharaoh had to surrender. And with this, I trust that we will have a better idea of what locusts causing darkness to the land, and thick clouds and fog causing darkness to the land for 3 days. All of these are happening in the month of Nisan. When we come to chapter 12, we find that God was describing what to do in the month of Nisan. And all of these are happening from Adar into Nisan very rapidly, one after another, so much so that the Israelites are seeing the intensifying of the plague of God upon Egypt. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.